Hi everyone, Ash Nightingale here, and today I've got a video for you on preparation of timber for laminated necks. So not so much a how to put a laminated neck together sort of a video, but more of a some of the theory behind what to consider, or what I personally would consider when I am putting together a laminated neck. So I've got a piece of mahogany here. This is the main bulk of the neck. I've got a piece of curly maple, which is an offcut from another neck that I built recently, and I've got a piece of purple heart here, so I'm going to be laminating my neck together out of these pieces. So the first thing to mention really is the reason that I like doing laminated necks is because the way that wood grows, you end up with stresses built into the wood. So I don't know if any of you have seen it when you push a piece of wood through the table saw and the cut that is coming out the other end of the blade either pinches together or you see it spreading apart, and that is basically some of the stress in the wood from the way it's grown being released. So the reason I like to do laminated necks is because what you're essentially doing is you're ripping the timber up, you're relieving that stress, some of it anyway. Then if you have a bow on your timber or something like this, you can pass it over the planer, you can thickness it, whatever tools you've got available, and you can then make it all true, nice and straight, and laminate it back together again. And I personally think that this is going to give you a nice, stable, strong neck, and yeah, I think it's a good way to build. I like doing it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my piece of mahogany and I'm going to cut 20mm off the top of it, because it's 120mm at the moment and I only need 100mm of it. And if you look at the way the grain is just slightly off to one side. It's still technically quarter sawn because it's anywhere between 60 to 90 degrees. It's still technically quarter sawn. So, but I'm choosing to take away this top part because it's the most angled grain. You see it's almost vertical at the bottom here and it goes off this way towards the top. So I'm going to take away this top part. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is trim 20mm off of here, and the next thing I'm going to do after that is rip it in half down the middle. First thing I need to do is plane a square edge on the bottom of this piece of mahogany, because at the moment it's just rough sawn on the bottom and it's not square at all. So I'm going to run into problems if I don't plane a square edge on the bottom of this. So the next thing I'll do is set the saw to just over 100mm, because I want to leave myself just a little bit of spare. So if I'm going to plane it down, I've got some spare there. The other thing to mention is I've got a respirator and ear defenders, because safety first. It's tropical hardwood, don't want to be breathing this stuff in, and this is pretty dusty. So this piece of wood's 100mm, just over, and my table saw will only cut 80mm or something, it won't cut 100mm, so I've got to move to the bandsaw now to rip this up, and I've scribed a line down the middle of it on the top. I find it's easier to cut just to the line rather than to a fence, so I'm just cutting to the line, and this is where I planed that square edge on the bottom of here earlier. And this is where this is going to come in handy, because I don't want this to be cutting at an angle like that. I want it to be cutting square and be cutting directly into two pieces. So I'm going to crack on and do that. So I've got these two rough sawn, sort of band sawn blanks now, and you can actually see, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but that's how much bow there is on these bits of timber now. So I've sort of relieved that much stress out of this piece of wood, and the next thing to do is to go back to the planer and to plane and edge these bits of timber to true them up and get a nice flat and square edge back on them, and then ready to pass them through the thicknesser. So I'm ready to thickness my mahogany. See, I've got my face mark and my edge mark, which means that this is a flat face and this is square to it, and I'm going to pass it through the thicknesser like this, take it down to 100mm in this direction and probably down to about 32mm in this direction. Okay, so for this piece of purple heart, at the moment it seems to be planed on this edge and rough sawn on the other side. And this is how it came from the timber supplier. So the other thing is, it's about 6mm, and I'm aiming for sort of the thickest I can get it really, so 5mm, something like that. So I want to try and preserve the thickness of it. The other thing to mention is that it's slab sawn, so the grain goes through this piece of wood that way, which means again that the grain is all going to end up vertical through the neck. So the first thing to do with this is to rip it down into 100mm widths, because that's the size of my neck blank. Something to note quickly on this as well is that the first thing I'm going to do before even ripping it in half is just to plane an edge onto it, because that just gives you a nice straight edge to work from. So I've cut this up into a 100mm wide strip. I've also cut it slightly over length, like to length as well, cutting this piece off because this has actually got a little bit of shape to it, and the shorter in length it is, the easier it is to get rid of that shape. So I've trimmed off as much as I can. That's basically just excess. So I'm going to put that to one side, and I will use this as my final piece. And what I need to do with this is take it to the planer and plane a nice flat true face onto it basically. So because I'm trying to preserve as much thickness as possible, I'm going to set my planer just to the sort of bare minimum of pass I can get away with. So that's set to about 1/2mm. I'm going to just take the bare minimum amount of passes and the bare minimum amount off to get a nice clean face on it. So because this piece of purple heart is getting quite thin now, I can't really put it near the planer anymore. I'm worried it's going to rip it to shreds, so I'm going to thickness it with a drum sander, and I'm going to try and take it down to probably about 4mm. So the last thing to do is the maple, and I've just taken this to the planer and I've planed this edge, and I've planed a square edge on here as well, so that's all square. And then what I've done is I've marked a line on the top here, and I've marked that line all the way down it, and then I'm just going to take this to the bandsaw and rip along that line very carefully to give me about a 6mm piece. And again, the grain runs vertically through this, just like everything else. Okay, so I've just finished prepping all my timber. The mahogany has just come out the thicknesser. I've got two nice straight blanks. They're 32mm thick, so that'd be good for laminated necks. So I'll get 2 neck templates out of each of these blanks. So 1 blank's enough for an entire neck, which is good. One more thing to say is that I hope you can see that on the camera. That is how I would glue the neck up, which is basically with the grain opposing. So you're putting the grain as a mirror image of, each piece a mirror image of the other, and that means that you're putting the forces working against each other rather than working in the same direction, which is more likely to make them warp. So that's just a good habit to get into when doing a laminated neck or any other joinery work you might be doing. The curly maple and the purple heart I did in the drum sander, because my planer won't go down that thin, and it's just a better way for me of thicknessing thinner material, especially figured wood. So this piece of curly maple, the grain goes through it that way, so it's flat sawn, just like all the other bits of timber in the neck. And what's good about that is that the figure is actually on the edge, so when this is glued up into the neck, we'll be looking at the edge of the timber, so we'll get that figure coming through when we look at the final neck. And so that's just a nice, attractive, kind of subtle detail, but it's another good thing to think about, as opposed to say a set of sides where the grain is going to be quarter sawn that way, and that means that your figure is all going to be showing on the edge of the wood, and so showing on the edge of the guitar. So just a few more points to think about really when you're preparing all your materials. So that's it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it informative. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone who you think might be interested. Other than that, just stay tuned and I'll try and keep the videos coming, and I'll catch you all soon.